Looks like we're live now.
Yep, we're live. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your participation and your interest. My name is Michael Steinberger. I am founder and CEO of Jewish Heritage Alliance, a platform dedicated to promoting the story of Sepharad, the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, nowadays Spain and Portugal. This is the fifth in a series of live interviews we delivered this week, featuring people with interest and connection to the story of Sepharad. I would like to acknowledge Hope Network for participating with us in these live interviews. Joining us this afternoon is Joseph Lovett, an award-winning filmmaker whose films focus on social, cultural, and health-related issues. After working at ABC News 2020 as director-producer, Joe created Lovett Productions. Over the years, Joe was honored with many awards, including AIDS Leadership Award and others. This afternoon, we will speak to him about his informative and inspiring documentary, Children of the Inquisition, where he details the hidden legacy of Sepharad. So, good afternoon, Joe, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. How are we doing?
Good, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for your enthusiastic support of our film. I really appreciate it.
So I think what we will do, so to put everything in focus, we'll take 3 minutes or so to show the trailer of the movie, and it'll give us a backdrop as to what we're talking about, and then we will continue the discussion. Sure. Nathan, if you would show the trailer, thank you.
One day, without any announcement, they're going to come down here and open the door and take you upstairs to the interrogation room. What is your? Where you're born? Are you descended from Jews or Moors?
The Inquisition was interested in heresy.
Do you know why you were arrested?
As a Spaniard, religion played a huge part in my growing up. I taught catechism. I was a Eucharistic minister.
The goal of the Inquisitors was to get you to confess.
Tell us all the things you might be guilty of.
Who is this individual that's forcibly converted?
So I was raised Catholic schoolgirl, beanie, plaid skirt.
For the Jews who converted but remained Jewish, there had to be a great sense of fear that they were going to be discovered.
If God had once favored the Jews, God had clearly changed teams.
So a lot of people became Christian.
And many of them became church people.
If they were secret Jews, they had, on pain of death, to remain secret.
The Inquisition threw people to the winds, to all four corners of the earth.
This is something that actually influenced the shaping of the entire New World.
My family was exiled from Spain in 1492.
The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire actually invited the Jews to settle within his domain.
So they went worldwide, essentially.
It became a quest for me to kind of crack the code.
There was this portrait of my great-grandfather wearing this big Ottoman fez. And that just added sort of to the mystery and the curiosity.
Why did my family keep so many secrets?
And I said, Father, why you said those things about the Jewish people? And there was this awkward silence. He said, who are you?
It was an incredible rush to go into the tower of my ancestor. I was walking in his footsteps.
See, I told you were my cousin.
Cousin!
Touch it. Smell it. It's history.
The reemergence of a family as Jewish after 300 years is mind-boggling.
And he said, how, Jewish custom? Why would my grandmother be doing a Jewish custom?
It feels like a calling. This is something that I had to do.
Hayom, Allah Vaveka. Your identity could be a choice, but then it's also your history isn't a choice.
I said to myself, oh my God, everything makes sense now.
This completely did not fit with my identity.
The rabbi took me around the back and showed me the signatures of all my family. He said, I can recognize you anywhere. You're one of us.
If it was for me to choose now, I choose the things they stole from me.
Wow.
No, I haven't seen that for a very long time. it really does tell us, it really does give you a good sense of what the film is about.
It absolutely does. And that's why we invited you this afternoon. So, for openers, I would ask you to share with our audience how or when you first heard about the story of Sfarad, what was the reason you took an interest in this narrative, and why it was important and relevant to you.
Well, it's a very funny and selfish story. When I was 13 and my bar mitzvah year, our rabbi, who I loved very, very much, and was a close friend of our family, was taking a sabbatical. And he asked if I would wait until he came back for my bar mitzvah. And I was very honored. I said, of course. But it made me very interested in what he was doing that was more important than bar mitzvahing me. And one of the things that he was doing was trying to do was a research project on the families that were descended from converted Jews in Spain, were then called the Marranos. And he came back, and he was doing a number of research projects. That was one of them. But he came back to Rhode Island, and where we're from, and he gave this incredible sermon called Todos Católicos, Everybody's Catholic. And he told of how he was trying to interview people about what may have been Jewish roots in their family. And no one could even consider a drop of Jewish blood. And no, they told him, Todos Católicos, everybody's Catholic. We've always been Catholic. And he talked about how the shadow of the Inquisition loomed so large over contemporary Spain that even to that day, the idea of having any Jewish blood was just terrifying. Now, if we look back, you realize this is just a couple of years after the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism was still very common throughout the world. It was Franco Spain, which was very, very Catholic Spain. And it wasn't great to be Jewish. And as a kid, 13 years old, I was stunned that something that had happened so many years before could still continue to have an impact on society today. And it stayed with me. And then years later, a new sister-in-law came into my family with Sephardic background, who I adored. And she and her mother would tell me about their family's journey from Spain to Turkey, to Rhodes, to Egypt, and then eventually to Rhode Island. And the stories were so fascinating. I decided I wanted to know more about this. I like mysteries, and I like taboo subjects. I like things that people don't want to talk about. So it intrigued me, and I spent, the first proposal on the film was written over 20 years ago. We started shooting about 10 years ago. So it took a long time to come to fruition.
Interesting. Share with us some of the support staff and because we just saw a very short clip, the trailer.
Right.
Can you share with us some of the support staff and the interview, the people you actually interviewed? Give us some background, how they came into play.
Oh, sure. Well, as I started to read about the subject and speak to people, one of the people who was most helpful to me at the very beginning was Jane Gerber, who founded the Sephardic Studies Department at the City University of New York. And Jane was very helpful in pointing me to the right books, including hers, which were terrific, and telling me what was going on, her perspective on things. She was very, very, very generous. And one day we were talking, and she said, "Hey, Joe, there's going to be a conference in Kingston, Jamaica on the Portuguese Jewish diaspora in the Caribbean." And I thought, well, that's a mouthful, the Portuguese Jewish diaspora in the Caribbean. None of those words made sense to me. None of them went together because I didn't know anything. And she said, "I think it would be good for you to come. And you'll get your feet wet. You'll really understand this whole topic better from different people's stories. And so I went and I decided that we would start to shoot, and I put a team together. And so we shot for about 4 or 5 days. It was a good conference put together by Jane, she was the co-chair, and Ainsley Enriquez, a genealogist from Kingston. And they brought people in from all over the world. And they had Sherrod Nahum, a very esteemed historian from the Sorbonne. They had Mordecai Arbel, another historian and former ambassador. They had Ronnie Perelis from the Yeshiva University in New York. They had some extraordinary people who were talking and participating. And they had people who weren't academics. They had people who were just interested in either what was or what might be their family heritage. And what was fascinating was that, to me, was that there were so many different ethnic groups and races among these people with Jewish background. It was really fascinating. And it's sort of not the sort of look at the Jewish world that you see in the United States East Coast. It's very, very, very different. It gave me a much bigger picture of what Jewishness is.
So as you go about preparing to actually do the documentary, now you need a cast of characters. You need to interview converses, etc. Can you share with us how this happens?
Yeah. It happens slowly. And my technique, the way I go about making films, I like difficult subjects. They could be scientific, they could be medical, they could be sociological, but I like a difficult subject that's sort of hard to get into. And I try to make it more welcoming to an audience by getting them intrigued by characters whose lives are affected by the issues of this topic. And I decided that that's what I was going to do with this. And this is the first, honestly, this is the first history I've ever done. And so I was looking for characters who could tell the story. And I figured that I might find people who could trace their ancestry back maybe to the 1700s. And then I thought Jews could never trace themselves further back than that. And then that a historian, an expert, could hypothesize as to what had happened to that family beforehand, going back to the Inquisition. Well, as I went to conferences and film festivals and listened to discussions, I heard people that knew much, much more. And like Doreen Carvajal, who talks about going to the castle of her ancestor in Spain, she traces her family back to the 1300s, to the very first person who converted to Catholicism. Carlos de Medeiros, who is talking about a priest in the seminary that he belonged to. You met him in the trailer. He found out that he was descended and could trace himself directly back to one of the most notorious victims of the Portuguese Inquisition, going back to the 1500s in Lisbon. So I got much, much more than I bargained for. Actually, I have a funny story. Before Jane had told me about this conference, I was at a party one night in Harlem in New York. And I was talking to this guy that I met, a filmmaker. He's a very nice guy. And I said, what are you doing? He says, what are you doing? And what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I'm really interested in this story about, the Sephardim and the Sephardic diaspora after the Inquisition. And he said, oh, you're kidding me. And he points over to his girlfriend at the next table. And he said, Ana Enriquez is she said, her father, that's his whole life passion. Her father was Ainsley Enriquez from Kingston, who has been a huge influence in getting people to understand their genealogy. And then it just wound up, and she told me about him, but it just wound up as a coincidence that Jane then maybe a year or two later was doing a conference with him. So it's funny how these worlds interconnect in the oddest places.
Yeah, it seems you have a convergence of a lot of people and situations that bring this together. To the best of your abilities to describe, from your personal point of view, how do you see this impacting, this unfolding story impacting both the Jewish people and the conversos going forward?
Well, I think that we have pulled back a curtain on a history that was hidden. And I think when I say hidden, not lost, but actually I think it was hidden by a number of factors. I think the Catholic Church, well, of course, first of all, history belongs to the conqueror. And so the Jews weren't the conquerors. And so this history, I think, was ignored. And then also the Catholic Church never needed any more bad publicity about the Inquisition. And I think Jewish people, the Jewish people, when things are quiet, many people's attitude is, we don't need to stir. We don't need to bring these things up. And as a result, there's been a lot of ignorance about this subject. And it's a very, very, very important chapter in the development of the modern world. I mean, do you realize that they say that 25 to 50% of the early colonists to Latin America were recently converted from Judaism, meaning in the last generation before they came. I mean, this is an extraordinary idea that these people had a Jewish background and they tended to marry one another because they had the same rituals, they had the same rites. And over the generations, they lost the religious meaning, but they kept the customs. In a way, it's funny, they were a little bit kosher, but they weren't believers. And so like Carlos's family, it's really fascinating. All the men are circumcised in his family to this day. These are devout Catholic families. They don't eat shellfish. They don't mix milk and meat. But it's never been associated with Judaism until a cousin started to do their genealogy. I mean, it's really, really fascinating. Doreen's 16th great grandfather, the one who converted. There was a wave of pogroms in Spain from the 1390s until the expulsion in 1492. And so during that 100 years, half the people converted, half the Jews converted, and then another half converted with the expulsion, with the Edict of Expulsion by Isabella. So there were, and 10% of the Iberian Peninsula at least was Jewish. So that's a lot of people with a Jewish background. And Doreen's 16th great grandfather, his name was Diego Ariastabila. He was converted as a child in the latter part of the 14th century, of the 1300s. He grew up in both worlds, both Jewish and Catholic, officially Catholic. However, they still practiced kosher. They were kosher at home for the most part. They observed the Sabbath. He sang Hebrew songs. I mean, he had his feet in both worlds. And then one of his sons became the youngest Archbishop of Spain. And it's really fascinating.
What a fascinating story. You know, you touched upon, I think, the whole mystery of this thing, this unfolding saga. It's, you know, I tell some people, it recently dawned upon me, you know, that whereas the Holocaust was so final in the outcome, you know, they butchered 6 or so million Jews, and that was it. Those people are gone. Whereas the events of Spain were also a Holocaust of a different nature, but the glaring difference is that we have now people 15 generations later coming back, or at least some of them. That's a very interesting twist.
Yeah. Well, remember it is very different. You can look at the two together, the Inquisition, the Holocaust. They're very, very different. To my understanding, during the 350 years of the Inquisition in Spain, and it went on for 350 years, 3,000 people were executed for Judaizing. Meaning the Spanish Inquisition, what was interesting particularly about that and the Portuguese Inquisition, is that they focused on people who had converted to Judaism and then were accused of sliding back. That was their focus. They weren't concerned about so much about witches or sodomists or anything like that. It was people who were heretics, having been Jews before and were sliding back to Judaism or had made insincere conversions. So, and the term is Judaizing. They had continued to Judaize. So that was the focus on that. And that's why we tend to look at it as anti-Semitic. And they issued blood laws so that you were suspect until you had been Catholic your family had been Catholic for 4 generations. So there was some racialness to it as well. But they weren't interested in killing people. They were interested in making them true Christians. That was really the goal, making them true Catholics. Whereas the Holocaust, of course, was the annihilation of the Jewish people. The Inquisition was the annihilation of the Jewish faith. So, you know, so it's a big difference. But it has a huge impact because many of these people are now finding out. What happened was, and this is really fascinating if people take a look at it. In the 1960s, with Vatican II, Pope John the 23rd, with Nostra Aetate, he exculpated the Jews for the death of Jesus. That the Jews did not, kill Jesus. It was the Romans. And before then, my Catholic friends, who I was very close to, on Sundays would go to church and their priest would be telling them that the Jews were guilty of the death of Jesus and were for eternity. So you can imagine how they might look at me when they returned to school or to the soccer field or whatever. So they may not have taken it too seriously, but you can't help but hear it. So when that was changed, that was a biggie. That was really a biggie. That was one step toward the end of institutionalized anti-Semitism. And then in 1992, with the 500th anniversary of Columbus, there was a lot of attention brought to what was happening in Spain in 1492. And what many people don't know, which we discuss in the film, is that Columbus set sail the very same week that the Jews were forced to leave Spain. The Edict of Expulsion was made in March of 1492, and it went into effect July 31st, 1492. It was Tisha B'Av. And Columbus waited until the holiday was over before he left. And so the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria were in the harbors with ships filled with Jews fleeing for safety. And most people have no idea. And three of his crewmen were converted Jews.
Very interesting. Yeah, we talk about that. That in fact, what many people don't know is that Jews were part of the discovery of the Americas.
Oh yeah, a big part, and the development of the Americas. And so what I find interesting is that here is my rabbi, Bill Browder, in the 1950s, trying to just get people to talk about this phenomenon and their heritage, which he couldn't. And then you come back to, let's say, from 1958, you come up to 1492, there are all these stories in the press about, because they start to be covered too, the Jewish diaspora and the expulsion. And so a lot of people who might have been the grandchildren of the people that my rabbi had been trying to interview could look at these news reports and say, oh, isn't that interesting? I wonder if that's why my father never went to church. I wonder if that's why my grandfather refused to have a priest at his bedside and at his funeral. I wonder if that's why my grandmother always lit candles in the basement. So all of a sudden, rather than being a shameful thing to hide, it became rather interesting. It became rather exotic. And so you put together the exculpation of the Jews by Pope John the 23rd in the 1960s, and then this light shone on the expulsion in 1992, and all of a sudden things started to open up.
So while we're talking about actually here interviewing the documentary itself, I would be remiss if I didn't at least ask you to share with our audience how, although we'll be working on some presentations together with you, but for those who are listening and who may be interested in viewing the movie, can you share with us how it's made available?
Oh, sure. We're doing it with a slow release, and we want people to talk about this film. We want them to talk with one another, and to Jews like to discuss things and debate things, and we want everybody to do that, not just Jews. So what we're doing is making the film available to institutions, to synagogues, to other houses of worship, to genealogical groups, to universities, schools. And we were sort of stymied by the COVID shutdown, but then we realized, oh, well, we can do things online like you and I are doing, Michael. So what we've devised, our director of outreach, Jordan Hawks, and I, what we've devised is a program to make the film available for a number of days to a community, maybe a synagogue. And so they get a special password. They can see that everybody can watch the film at their leisure. It's a 2-hour film, so they may want to watch it in parts. And then at the end of a period, we then have a Zoom talkback. It may be just me and another interviewer like you, or it might be, we might put a panel together for them of different people who want to, from the film, or different experts or psychotherapists. There's a lot of discussion of intergenerational trauma, as there is from the Holocaust. And we've been talking about that. There are a lot of topics that come up: immigration, refugee status, identity, assimilation. There are a lot of interesting topics that can come back to this, these origins. It's really interesting. So if they can just go to our website, www.childrenoftheinquisition.com. That's www.childrenoftheinquisition.com. There's a form there where they can get in touch with us and ask about having a screening, and we can put that together. The fee is $1,000 minimum for the shortest period of time, which is 48 hours, and that's how it works.
So we'll be sure to put up your information on this recording. And
by the way, some people have used it for fundraisers for their organization.
Correct.
There are a lot of different ways to do it.
Okay, then I thank you very much for sharing your specific journey and with us today. I think it was very informative. I also would like to thank our viewers for joining us and invite everyone to come back this afternoon for the final in a series of 6, where I will be interviewed. And for those of you who want to learn more about the story of Sfarad, follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, and of course our website. And Joe, thank you again. I wish you and everybody else a pleasant afternoon, and we'll see you later. Take care.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me, and good luck with your efforts to get the word out about this really incredibly important subject.
Thank you very much, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.